This is Dominismo Voxlore, transmitting from the depths of the Forge, across the flames of Nocturne and the long night of the Imperium. In this broadcast, we follow the trail of the Fireborn, Vulkan, Primarch of the Salamanders, a smith, a warrior, and an immortal who walk through death itself. From the infernos of Nocturne to the ashes of Istvaan, from the labyrinth of Percherobo to the burning skies of Ullanor, this is the story of the hammer that never broke and the fire that never died. Strike the seal of subscription, brothers of the Forge, and stand beside the sons of Vulkan. Join the fire that defies the dark and help keep these transmissions burning bright across the void. Stand close to the flame, brothers. The Forge is hot, and the truth is eternal. In the far reaches of Imperium's past, before the Primarchs were reclaimed by the Emperor, a child fell from the stars onto a world racked by fire. The planet was called Nocturne, a volatile death world located in the Ultima Segmentum. It was a place of extremes, jagged obsidian mountains, seas of lava, and a sky cloaked in eternal ash. The planet's core was unstable, subjecting its surface to regular, devastating seismic upheavals known as the Time of Trial. This apocalyptic cycle broke mountains and swallowed settlements whole, yet it was not the only threat its people faced. Colossal beasts roamed the land, predators forged in fire and shadow. Life on Nocturne was harsh, survivor harder still, and only the strongest endured. It was into this crucible that one of the Emperor's lost sons was hurled by the forces of chaos, scattered through the Imperium with the other Primarchs. When his gestation pod screamed through Nocturne's atmosphere, it left a trail of flame across the night sky before crashing into the mountains near the settlement of XVIII. The locals who followed the impact found a child, unharmed by heat or violence, nestled within the broken shell of his pod. They did not know what he was, but they sensed something unearthly. Towering even in youth, with coal black skin and eyes like burning coals, the boy radiated power, yet his expression was not one of menace. It was calm, kind, curious. He was taken in by a blacksmith named Nabel, who gave him a name, Vulkan. Unlike other Primarchs who wrestled with the identity or the isolation of power, Vulkan embraced his adoptive people. He grew quickly, his stature and strength becoming the stuff of legends within mere years. He could lift molten metal with his bare hands. He worked for hours in the forges without tiring, shaping weapons and tools with artistry and precision no other smith could match. Yet he was no brooding demigod. He laughed, he told stories, he hunted with the men of the village and helped rebuild what the quakes had shattered. He was, above all, fiercely protective. When the dark-scaled drakes descended from the mountains during the Time of Trial, it was Vulkan who took up his hammer and led the charge to drive them back. But the world remained hostile. Nocturne's orbit was erratic, and every 15 years it passed close to its moon, Prometheus. The gravitational strain triggered apocalyptic volcanic eruptions across the surface. These cataclysms were devastating, entire towns obliterated by fire, the land reshaped in moments. Yet the people endured, and Vulkan endured with them. Then came the strangers. The raiders descended from the sky in black ships, bearing weapons of terrifying sophistication. They were the Dark Eldar, and they struck during the Time of Trial, when the planet was most vulnerable. With sadistic precision, they butchered their way through Hesiod's defenders. Vulkan's own adoptive father, Nabel, was slain trying to protect the Forge. The Primarch, still young in human years, but grown and unyielding, took up a massive warhammer and went to war. The slaughter that followed became the foundation of legend. Vulkan's fury was apocalyptic. He crushed warriors with blows that shattered bone and armour alike, wading into the heart of the Xenos host with fire and wrath. The people rallied behind him, emboldened by the sight of a god in mortal form standing between them and extinction. By the battle's end, the ground ran black with blood, and the skies cleared for the first time in living memory. The victory was not total. Many villages had been razed, families were torn apart, but the people saw something in Vulkan that day, something more than strength. He was not just their protector, he was their hope. When the Emperor came to Nocturne, he did so in secret. He came not as a conqueror, but as a father reclaiming his lost son. Disguised in the guise of a wandering blacksmith, the Emperor entered Hesiod and challenged Vulkan to a contest, a forge duel and a hunt. They would each craft the finest weapon they could and then see who could slay the mightiest beast in the mountains. Vulkan accepted, never knowing the stranger's true identity. Both men returned with weapons worthy of myth, but it was Vulkan who emerged from the mountains carrying the carcass of a fire drake on his back, slain without armour, without aid, his skin blackened but unburnt. The stranger had used trickery to survive. Vulkan had faced the beast on its own terms. Yet when the contest ended and the Emperor revealed himself, Vulkan did not rage or shrink. He bowed his head and pledged his loyalty, not because he had lost, but because he had recognised a kindred flame. He knew this man was his maker. In the years that followed, the Emperor would uplift the Salamander's Legion and give it to Vulkan's command. But the man who left Nocturne was shaped not by imperial dogma, but by the fire and brotherhood of a world that demanded compassion alongside strength. Vulkan did not leave his people behind. He swore that the Salamanders would always return to Nocturne, would always protect the weak, and would never become monsters in the name of conquest. The seeds of that philosophy were planted in ash and forged in hardship. Nocturne did not merely host Vulkan, it made him. Long before the horrors of the Horus Heresy, before the madness of betrayal or the burden of immortality, there was only a boy in a blacksmith's home. A hammer, a forge, a fire that would never die. The moment Vulkan knelt before the Emperor marked more than just the reunion of father and son. It was the beginning of a transformation that would carry the blacksmith king from the fire-racked valleys of Nocturne to the blood-soaked stars of the galaxy. Though the Primarch had lived a life tempered by hardship and brotherhood, he now stood at the threshold of a new purpose. The Emperor offered him command of the 18th Legion, bred from his own gene seed and awaiting his leadership across the void. Yet Vulkan was not a man to accept such power lightly. He understood the responsibility as a burden, not a prize. When he first beheld the Salamander's Legion, they were unlike the warriors of his homeland. Hardened veterans of the Great Crusade, their numbers were fewer than many of their brother legions. Worn down by brutal compliance campaigns and overlooked in the Emperor's grand strategies, they were resilient but fractured. Burnished iron waiting for a master's touch. Vulkan did not arrive in their lives with a fanfare of banners or declarations of divine right. He came as a smith among soldiers. He walked their ranks, learned their names, listened to their stories, and then he led them, not with distant orders, but by example. His doctrine was not one of shock and awe, like the Night Lords or the World Eaters, nor the cold logic of the Iron Hands. Vulkan forged a legion that valued humanity over destruction. The Salamanders were taught to protect as fiercely as they fought. Civilians were not collateral, they were the very reason a war was fought at all. It was a revolutionary ethic in a galaxy increasingly ruled by pragmatism and ruthlessness. From the start, Vulkan's ideals clashed with the prevailing winds of the Crusade. When Horus sought glory and Guilliman sought order, Vulkan sought meaning. He reshaped his legion's tactics, favouring close-range engagements and durable armour, methods that allow them to fight among the people, not above them. His warriors wielded flame, melter and thunderhammers, turning battlefields into crucibles. Their war gear, like their Primarch, was masterfully crafted, often by their own hands. The Salamanders were artisans as much as warriors. Each weapon was a symbol, each suit of armour a legacy. As the Crusade stretched across the stars, Vulkan led the 18th into war zones that others feared to tread. He took his sons to the deadliest battlefronts, not for glory, but because he knew they would fight not just well, but wisely. He spared no effort in shielding the weak. He would halt an advance to evacuate a village, pause a siege to rescue the innocent. In a galaxy where speed and efficiency ruled, such acts earned him scorn. Many Primarchs respected Vulkan. Some did not understand him. The most vocal criticism came from those who saw his compassion as weakness. Yet Vulkan's fury on the battlefield dispelled any notion of frailty. He was a tempest in war, his hammer a comet's fury, his presence titanic. He would often wade into the heart of the enemy alone, knowing his example would rally those behind him. His bond with his sons was unbreakable. Unlike other legions, whose gene sons feared their Primarch or worshipped him from afar, the Salamanders loved Vulkan, and he loved them in return. He knew their faces, praised their craftsmanship, mourned their deaths. This intimacy created a legion not just of soldiers, but of brothers. Still, the Crusade wore on. Vulkan participated in compliance after compliance, bringing light to dark worlds, defending colonies from alien horrors, breaking tyrants with flame and iron. But not all victories were equal. On more than one occasion, Vulkan openly refused to employ scorched earth tactics that would endanger civilians. When told by Imperial planners to sacrifice a settlement to exterminate a Xenos infestation, Vulkan refused, developing his own, slower strategy to preserve life. It worked, but his defiance earned whispers. These whispers never became accusations, for Vulkan's loyalty was absolute. He revered the Emperor, not as a god, but as a father who had shown him the stars. Yet he questioned. He asked why the Imperium, a force of unification, so often resembled a machine of annihilation? These were dangerous questions, but Vulkan did not care for politics, he cared for people. Among his brothers, he found allies in those who valued humanity, Corvus Corax, Sanguinius, and Ferrus Manus chief among them. With Ferrus, he shared not only ideals, but a kinship of craft. The two often met to design weapons and discuss the philosophical role of the Primarchs. It was during one of these meetings that Vulkan unveiled a weapon he'd forged, a massive hammer of burning fury. He called it Dawnbringer. Ferrus nodded in approval, for he knew the fire behind its creation. In the shadow of such camaraderie, a storm was brewing, one that Vulkan could sense but not name. There were rumours of dissent, of legions growing too proud, of Primarchs forgetting that power was a tool, not a crown. Vulkan warned his sons to remain vigilant, to hold fast to their principles. The Great Crusade, he feared, was becoming something darker. Yet he pressed on, ever the hammer at the forge, shaping not only victory, but virtue. His legion grew more unified, more disciplined, more bound to the values he held sacred. On every battlefield they left not just ash, but hope. Relief centres, rebuilt infrastructure, aid to the displaced. Their methods were slower, their losses sometimes higher, but where they fought, people remembered them not as conquerors, but as saviours. As the Emperor's vision expanded toward the outer edge of the galaxy, Vulkan stood ready, undaunted, unwavering. He believed in the Imperium, even if he did not always understand its choices. He believed in humanity, even if humanity sometimes faltered. And he believed in his sons, born of fire, tempered by duty, and guided by compassion. The hammer had been raised, the forge had been lit, but the war that would test the core of Vulkan's beliefs had not yet begun. In the shadows of brotherhood and battle, something waited, and even the brightest fire could not hold back the darkness forever. Before the galaxy turned on itself, before betrayal shattered the bonds of brotherhood, there were victories that still shimmered in the ash of memory. One such victory came on Taras, a world of fire and glass, and the anvil upon which Vulkan proved, beyond question, what it meant to lead. Taras was a frontier world, modest in size and wealth but crucial to the Imperium's expansion in Segmentum Tempestus. Its volcanic crust was rich with geothermal energy, its cities engineered with layered habdomes to resist tectonic pressure. A proud world, built by its people with strength, not luxury. But Taras had become a target. The foe came from beyond the known edges of space, an orc warhost, crude in construction but monstrous in size, pouring through the void in rusted hulks daubed with blood and glyphs. Warlord Bardrock, known as the Iron Beast, led them, a green-skinned colossus clad in armour fused with looted tanks, shouting challenges into the void before his invasion even began. Taras's PDF was brave but unprepared. When the first dropship screamed through the atmosphere and turned the sky into fire, the call went out. Many legions were engaged elsewhere. Vulkan was not. The Salamanders answered. They did not arrive in spectacle, but in strength. Vulkan's fleet entered orbit silently, their hulls blackened and functional, their deployment precise. They did not waste words. They made planetfall amid the smoke and immediately began fortifying the cities. Taras would not fall, not while Vulkan stood. From the beginning, the Primarch's approach was different. He did not establish a command post on high or retreat into a ship's command deck. Vulkan walked the perimeter. He stood on the walls with the local defenders. He took reports from salamanders and PDF alike. He studied the terrain, lava tubes, cooling fields, geothermal vents, and turned Taras's own volatility into a weapon. Within days, the salamanders had transformed the city's districts into kill zones. Flame turrets were installed at choke points. Promethean pipelines were rerouted to trap zones. The orcs would not just be repelled, they would be broken. When Bardrock's horde descended in full, it came with the violence of a tidal wave. Hulking war machines stampeded across the surface. Squadrons of ramshackle aircraft clawed at the skies, and behind them, tens of thousands of green-skinned monsters screaming for war. The PDF lines cracked, panic spread, but then the salamanders held the line. Vulkan himself took to the walls. Clad in emerald ceramite, with his great hammer Dawnbringer in hand, he rallied the defenders. His presence was like gravity, unshakable, constant, inescapable. Where the line faltered, he was there. Where men fled, he stood fast. And behind him, the 18th Legion brought fire. Their flamers poured purifying heat into the orc masses. Melter guns turned armoured knobs into slag. Breacher squads held the alleyways like mountain roots, unyielding. The Orcs had the numbers, the Salamanders had purpose. As the siege dragged on, Vulkan made decisions other commanders would not. He sent teams into the lower sectors to evacuate trapped civilians, personally overseeing extractions that others would deem a waste of time. He halted a retreating Salamander squad to reinforce an embattled PDF outpost, risking elite warriors to protect mortal lives. His sons did not question him. They knew why they fought. But Bardrock was not easily beaten. The warlord's mechs constructed a mobile war fortress, a crawling monstrosity of treads and guns the size of hat blocks. It ploughed through the outer defences, its guns pulverising entire buildings. For a moment, even the Salamanders staggered. Vulkan did not wait. He launched a counter-offensive, leading a breach team of Terminators into the belly of the beast. They teleported into the war fortress mid-movement, fighting through corridors of scrap metal and blood. Inside, it was a labyrinth of noise and violence. Orcs fell by the dozens, burned or bludgeoned by unrelenting firepower. Vulkan carved a path with Dawnbringer, each swing pulping steel and bone. At the fortress core, he met Bardrock. The two giants clashed in a duel of raw brutality, Primarch versus Warlord. The Orc was a mountain of iron and hate, swinging a buzzsaw axe that split walls apart. Vulkan met him head on, his hammer ringing like thunder. The fight was relentless, sparks and blood flew in equal measure. Bardrock roared in fury. Vulkan said nothing. In silence, he fought. Not for glory, but for those who could not fight for themselves. With a final blow that cratered the deck beneath them, Dawnbringer shattered Bardrock's skull. The war fortress collapsed soon after, its core overloaded by the Salamander's sabotage. The explosion lit the night sky like a second sun. In the days that followed, the Orc horde faltered. Leaderless, they broke apart. Salamanders hunted the remnants with surgical precision. Taras was saved. But Vulkan did not celebrate. He walked the ruins of the city, helping lift rubble, tending to the wounded, ensuring the restoration began immediately. He stayed on Taras for weeks after the last Orc fell, rebuilding power grids, helping reforge destroyed infrastructure. He spoke at funerals, not as a commander, but as a brother. This was the lesson of Taras. Not just that Vulkan could win, but that he refused to let victory become another form of loss. Where others would have burned the world to defeat the enemy, he lit a flame to protect it. The campaign became legend among the 18th Legion. To those outside, it was a footnote in a long war. But for those who were there, for those who survived because Vulkan chose to care, it was a moment when the Imperium lived up to its promise. Taras had been under siege, but had not broken, because the wall that held was not made of stone, but of fire, and the will of a Primarch who never turned away. The Great Crusade had been a blaze of triumph. The legions had conquered in the Emperor's name, united the scattered remnants of humanity, and forged an empire that stretched across the stars. But beneath the light of victory, the shadow had already taken root. It began with whispers. Horus, the War Master, wounded and changed on divan, rumours of brother against brother, and then came Istvaan. When word reached Nocturne that Horus had turned traitor and slain loyal sons of the Emperor, Vulkan's heart burned with disbelief. He had fought beside the War Master, he had trusted him. Yet when the call to arms came, when Horus's rebellion openly ignited, the Salamanders were among the first to answer the Emperor's summons. Vulkan gathered his sons, not with speeches of vengeance, but with vows of duty. They descended upon Istvaan V alongside the Raven Guard and the Iron Hands. 3 legions united in loyalty, their mission clear, to bring retribution upon the traitors entrenched below. The air was thick with ash and deceit, though none yet knew it. The first waves landed in good order. The Loyalists drove the traitor legions before them, World Eaters, Death Guard, Sons of Horus. The battle raged across the blackened plains, and Vulkan strode through it like a god of war reborn. His hammer, Dawnbringer, split tanks apart and shattered fortifications. Fire and fury swept the battlefield as Salamanders advanced behind him, flamers and melter cannons roaring in unison. For a time, it seemed victory was at hand. Then came the signal. It was not a call to advance, but to die. From the ridges above, the second wave of legions descended, not as reinforcements, but as executioners. The Alpha Legion, the Iron Warriors, the Word Bearers, and worst of all, the Night Lords. The Loyalists were surrounded. The betrayal was absolute. Vulkan's legion fought with desperate courage. The Iron Hands were caught in the open and slaughtered under orbital fire. The Raven Guard tried to regroup, but their wings were cut before they could rise. Vulkan gathered his salamanders into defensive circles, flame and hammer meeting the storm from all sides. The ground was carpeted with the dead, friend and foe alike. Shells fell like rain. The air was a furnace of smoke and burning blood. Through it all, Vulkan refused to retreat. His voice rose above the din, steady and unbroken, commanding his sons to hold, to endure, to fight until the last breath. The traitor legions closed in like wolves. Against the Iron Warriors, the salamanders held with brutal defiance. When the Night Lords fell upon them, it was Curze himself who came for Vulkan. The two Primarchs met amidst the ruin, flame against shadow, mercy against madness. Their duel was a clash of ideologies as much as strength. Curze taunted Vulkan, mocking his compassion, his belief in the worth of humanity. Vulkan's reply was his hammer. He struck with righteous fury, every blow a denial of the darkness his brother had embraced. But the field was against him. The salamanders were dying in droves, the sky itself was burning, and even a Primarch's endurance has limits. Curze's madness was boundless. He fought with feral precision, his claws rending armour and flesh alike. The two titans traded wounds that would have felled gods. At last, Curze struck a killing blow, driving his talons through Vulkan's chest, black blood spilling into the ashen earth. The Lord of the Salamanders fell. The Night Haunter stood over his fallen brother, chest heaving, eyes wide, not in triumph, but in disbelief. Vulkan, even in death, showed no fear. The massacre that followed was beyond words. The plains of Istvaan became a graveyard for loyalty. The surviving salamanders were cut down or taken captive. The Raven Guard fled into the waste, broken and bleeding. The Iron Hand's Primarch, Ferrus Manus, lay dead, his head severed by Fulgrim's blade. For Vulkan, the nightmare was only beginning. He awoke, not to light, but to torment. Comrade Curze had taken him alive. The Night Haunter wanted proof that even the most compassionate of the Emperor's sons could break. Vulkan was dragged in chains across the Night Lord's ship, subjected to torture that would have destroyed any mortal. But Vulkan was no mortal. Curze burned him, drowned him, impaled him, tore him apart, and every time, Vulkan rose again. His screams faded into silence. His body mended. His resolve did not waver. For within him burned a secret truth. He was a perpetual. Death could not claim him. To Curze, this was madness. To Vulkan, it was purpose. But that chapter of torment belongs to another part of his story. On Istvaan V, the legend of the Salamanders was written in fire and betrayal. They had not fallen because they were weak. They had fallen because they had trusted. When the smoke cleared and the traitors departed, the fields of Istvaan were silent. The corpses of heroes lay where they had stood, their armour blackened, their banners reduced to ash. And though Vulkan's body was gone, the echo of his defiance remained. The Emperor's hammer had fallen, the flame had been buried beneath the ashes. But in the void beyond, that fire had not gone out. It waited, deep within the darkness, within pain, within the unbroken will of a Primarch who refused to die. The war for the soul of humanity had begun. There are few horrors in the galaxy that can break a Primarch. But on the cold decks of the Night Lord's warship drifting through the void, Vulkan learned what it meant to be unmade. Comrade Curze did not seek victory in battle. He sought revelation through agony. After Istvaan, the Night Haunter carried Vulkan's broken body aboard his flagship, the Nightfall, and began a campaign of cruelty not for conquest, but for curiosity. Curze wanted to prove that even the noblest of the Emperor's sons could fall. He chained Vulkan in a chamber of steel and shadow, surrounded by relics of torment, hooks, blades, brands, and tools that whispered of artistry twisted beyond reason. Curze had seen the truth of the galaxy as he understood it: chaos, murder, inevitability. In Vulkan, he saw everything that defied it: compassion, mercy, restraint. And that defiance was intolerable. The tortures began without preamble. Vulkan was beaten, burned, flayed, and electrocuted. His body was shattered beyond recognition, his black skin blistered and torn, his bones turned to powder beneath Curze's hands. Yet each time he died, he returned. It was a cycle of death and rebirth that stretched beyond measure. The first resurrection left Curze startled. The second enraged him. By the third, the Night Haunter's fascination had turned to obsession. He began killing Vulkan in new ways each time, testing limits, seeking answers. He slit the Primarch's throat and watched the wound knit shut. He decapitated him, only to see his eyes flicker back to life moments later. He vaporised his body in plasma fire, and still, Vulkan rose from ash. And through it all, Vulkan said little. At first, he cried out in pain as any living being would. Then he learned silence. Then he learned endurance. His mind retreated inward, away from the suffering, towards something deeper, something the Night Haunter could never touch. For Vulkan's immortality was not a gift of chaos. It was not sorcery or trickery. It was his very essence, his soul tempered in the forges of creation itself. He was what the Emperor had perhaps always intended him to be, a perpetual flame. To Curze, it was heresy. To Vulkan, it was penance. Time lost meaning. Days, months, years, none could be counted in the dark. Curze would appear at random intervals, his pale face flickering in the half-light, his laughter echoing through the cell. He spoke endlessly, of fate, of hypocrisy, of the Emperor's lies.
"You are a fool, brother," Curze hissed more than once. "You bleed for mortals who will curse your name. You suffer for a father who sees us as tools. What have you gained?"
Vulkan would not answer. Sometimes he would smile. That silence drove the Night Haunter to new depths of fury. Eventually, Curze began to parade Vulkan through the ship, displaying him to his warriors as a mockery of divinity. The Night Lords jeered and spat, calling him the undying slave. Some feared him, others worshipped him. Vulkan endured it all. He was a beacon in a place that had forgotten light. But even his endurance had limits. Madness began to creep into his thoughts, like smoke through the cracks of his mind. He started to dream, not of salvation, but of Nocturne, of the forges, of his sons burning on Istvaan's plain. Each death blurred into the next. He began to question if he had truly survived, or if he was trapped in a cycle of punishment without end. Then, amid this torment, something changed. During one of Curze's manic experiments, a group of salamander slaves, captured during the Dropsite massacre, were brought before their Primarch. They were forced to watch as Curze burned him alive. Yet even through the agony, Vulkan looked upon his sons with calm. "Do not break," he told them, voice a rasp of ash and smoke. "Endure." That moment, small as it was, reignited something within him. The Haunter had stripped away his armour, his dignity, his peace, but it could not strip away faith. Vulkan remembered who he was, not just a weapon, but a guardian, a smith, a father. The cycle continued, but now each death became an act of defiance, each rebirth a refusal to surrender. The flames that consumed him were no longer his enemies, they were the forge that purified his will. Curze, infuriated, sought new means to shatter him. He starved him of light and sound for months, left him drifting in the void, sealed in a sarcophagus of iron. But when he opened it, Vulkan looked up at him, smiling faintly, eyes still burning with the same inner fire. It was then that Curze realised the truth he could not bear. Vulkan could not be broken. What followed was an act of cruelty even Curze struggled to justify. He delivered the Primarch to the Dark Mechanicum of the Traitor Fleet, offering him as a curiosity to the Forges of Madness. There, Vulkan was dissected and studied, his body stripped for knowledge of his regeneration. The heretic artifacts claimed that his genetic structure was impossibly stable. Beyond replication, beyond corruption, he was perfect. And perfect, to the denizens of the Warp, was intolerable. For a time, even the powers of chaos took notice. In the depths of his agony, Vulkan's soul brushed against the Imperium. He saw visions, his brothers at war, the galaxy tearing itself apart, and the Emperor, distant, silent, unreachable. But he did not curse, he did not cry out. He whispered one thing, again and again, into the dark. "I am Vulkan. I endure." The Night Haunter's cage had not extinguished him, it had tempered him. What emerged from that void of torment was not the same being who had fallen on Istvaan. He was reborn in suffering, reforged in pain. The fire had been beaten, broken, scattered into embers, but those embers still burned. And when fate finally tore open the gates of his prison, the galaxy would learn that even in the darkest night, there was one flame that could never be smothered. There are prisons that hold the body, and others that hold the soul. The one built for Vulkan did both. When Conrad Curze had exhausted every form of cruelty, he gave his brother to another monster. The Night Haunter wanted new entertainment. Percherobbo wanted an experiment. Together, they gave birth to a cage that defied reason. A prison not of stone, but of geometry and madness. They called it the Tesseract Labyrinth. Forged by the Dark Mechanicum, it was a construct where space folded and time bent. Within it, there was no up or down, no day or night, only endless corridors of fire and darkness. Every death reset the labyrinth. Every breath rewrote the air. It was, as Percherobbo called it, a perfect equation of suffering. Vulkan was cast into it, bound in chains of molten metal that cooled instantly upon his skin. He awoke alone in a maze that breathed and shifted like a living thing. The walls were lined with mirrors of heat, reflecting his own agony back at him. He wandered through 1,000 false worlds. Nocturne aflame, his sons dead, his father's voice calling to him from the dark. Each illusion broke upon his endurance. He died, he returned, he died again. The labyrinth had no beginning and no end, only repetition. But even infinity can wear down its maker. Vulkan began to notice patterns, the pulse of machinery, the hum of power beneath the molten floor. There was a rhythm to this place, a heartbeat, and a heartbeat meant a heart. He followed that pulse. Through firestorms and collapsing halls he walked, until at last the labyrinth opened into a vast spherical chamber of blinding light. At its centre stood a solitary anvil of black metal, and upon it rested a hammer. The moment he saw it, something within him stirred. He knew the weapon before he touched it. Dawnbringer. His creation, his companion through wars uncounted. The hammer forged with Ferrus Manus in the Great Crusade's dawn. The machine spirit within it sang softly as he reached for the haft, its song weak but familiar. As his hand closed around it, the labyrinth quaked. And from the shadows came laughter, low, mocking, and all too familiar. Curze stepped into the light, gaunt and pale, eyes gleaming like knives.
"You think that hammer can save you?" he sneered. "You think it will open a door that isn't there? This prison is your truth, Vulkan. You cannot escape what you are."
Vulkan rose, Dawnbringer heavy in his grip. The weapon's weight steadied him. It was not salvation, it was identity. "I don't need it to save me," he said quietly. Curze tilted his head, amused.
"Then what use is it? What use is a weapon that cannot kill your enemy or free you from your cage?"
Vulkan looked down at the hammer, its glow reflecting in his eyes. Not bright, but steady. "It's still a hammer." For a moment, the Night Haunter faltered. That quiet conviction, that refusal to surrender even the smallest truth of himself, struck deeper than any blow could. Then Curze screamed, and the fight began. The two Primarchs collided amid the roaring light of the labyrinth's core. Claw met hammer, shadow met flame. Every strike of Dawnbringer tore through the false walls around them, sending shockwaves through the structure. Curze fought with manic fury, his laughter echoing through the collapsing corridors.
"You can't win," he shrieked. "You can't kill me. You can't even die properly."
Vulkan parried, his movements measured, his expression carved in stone. "You don't understand, brother," he said between hammer blows. "It isn't about winning." He swung Dawnbringer in a wide arc that shattered Curze's guard and sent the Night Haunter sprawling across the molten floor. "It's about enduring." He raised the hammer once more and brought it down with all the strength left in him. The blow didn't strike Curze, it struck the anvil at the heart of the chamber. The shockwave was cataclysmic. Light filled the labyrinth, pure and searing. The walls folded inward, angles bleeding into impossible shapes. The Tesseract screamed as its structure buckled beneath the force of the hammer's impact. Curze howled as he was thrown into the imploding light, his form dissolving into shadow.
"You haven't escaped," he shrieked. "You have only delayed the truth."
Vulkan stood amid the fire, Dawnbringer blazing white hot in his grip. The labyrinth's geometry twisted around him, tearing itself apart. He felt his body being pulled in every direction, his vision consumed by fire. But even as reality disintegrated, he stood firm, a single point of will in the storm. The hammer's power surged. There was a flash, and then nothing. Vulkan fell through the void, tumbling through the warp's endless night. He saw visions as he descended, Nocturne's burning peaks, the Emperor seated in silence, Guilliman's realm of order surrounded by chaos. Each vision passed like sparks in the wind. When he woke, there was no more labyrinth, only the cold of space. There was a planet below, a blue-white world ringed with orbital docks and the faint glow of civilization. Macragge. The hammer flared, discharging its last energy. A burst of light enveloped him as he was torn from the warp and hurled downward. He struck the upper atmosphere like a meteor, his armour igniting instantly. Flames consumed him, metal liquefied, flesh turned to ash. For an instant, he was nothing but fire, a falling star tearing across the skies of Ultramar. Yet even as the heat stripped him to bone, his heart refused to die. The fire that burned him was him, and it carried him home. When the light faded, a crater smoked in the mountains north of Hera's fortress. At its centre lay a figure of blackened bone and cooling metal, the haft of a hammer clutched in skeletal fingers. The impact had shaken the valleys of Macragge to their roots. Farmers miles away swore they had seen a second sun fall from the heavens. When the first response teams arrived, the air still shimmered with heat. Within the crater, they found him. A shape half fused with slag and stone, armour reduced to molten plates, every inch burned beyond recognition, and yet, impossibly, alive. The Ultramarines of the Aurora's spear knelt when they saw the hammer beside him, its head cracked but unmistakable. Word raced to the fortress of Hera, and soon Roboute Guilliman himself descended to the site. The Primarch of Ultramar stood before the smoking pit and gazed down at the charred ruin of his brother. Even through the ash, he could feel it, the faint pulse of life, slow and stubborn. He was brought to Macragg's fortress of Hera, entombed in a chamber of marble and light. Apothecaries and librarians worked tirelessly to mend his physical wounds, but the damage was deeper than flesh. He muttered to shadows, saw ghosts that were not there, called for sons who had perished on Istvaan. At times, he did not know his own name. But Guilliman would not give up on him. He sat at his brother's bedside for days, speaking softly of the old days of the Crusade, of victories shared, of Ferrus and Corax, of the dream their father had once promised them all. Sometimes, Vulkan would smile faintly, as if hearing an echo from far away. Sometimes, his eyes would blaze with sudden fire, and he would mutter, "The fire never dies. It only waits." In those moments, Guilliman saw glimpses of the warrior he had once known. Then came Sanguinius, the angel of Baal, pale, luminous, and burdened by his own visions of doom. Drawn to Ultramar by the same storm that had torn Vulkan from the warp, he too sought purpose in the chaos. Together, Guilliman and Sanguinius began to build a plan, a secondary empire, a refuge for the Imperium's light. They called it Imperium Secundus. But to legitimise this fragile bastion, they needed something greater than power. They needed a symbol, a sign that the Emperor's will still burned. And so, when Vulkan rose at last from his bed, his mind fragmented but his body whole, they found that symbol standing before them. He remembered little of his journey. Fragments came and went like sparks on the wind. The burning maze, the endless pain, the hammer in his hand. He did not speak of it. When asked, he simply said, "I fell into the dark, and I walked out again." At first, Guilliman tried to protect him, assigning him guards and counsel, believing him still too unstable to lead. But Vulkan resisted. His strength returned swiftly, and with it came purpose. He wandered the streets of Macragg's rebuilt cities, speaking with its people, the artisans, the refugees who had fled the heresy. He repaired broken machines with his own hands, blessed the forges, and guided the artificers of Ultramar in their craft. In his presence, morale rose. The people began to whisper that the Fireborn had returned. Yet even as he inspired others, darkness lingered within him. He suffered flashes of rage, violent fits where he could no longer tell illusion from reality. He would awaken in the dead of night, his hands clenched around an unseen weapon, muttering about the maze and the voices. In those moments, Guilliman's doubts returned. Could Vulkan still be trusted? Could he still command his legion, or even himself? It was Sanguinius who answered him, reminding Guilliman that he is what he must be, and that he may be wounded and remembering pain, but he is unbroken and still hopes, and that is what will save us. And so, Vulkan was welcomed into the council of Imperium Secundus, a trinity of broken gods, each carrying their own scar. Guilliman, the pragmatist who saw order where there was none. Sanguinius, the prophet of light doomed to die. And Vulkan, the immortal flame who could not extinguish even when he wished to. Together, they built a fragile peace amid the madness of the galaxy. But fate was not done testing them. As the warp storms around Ultramar thickened, strange omens began to appear. Astropath screamed of a figure walking within the void, a man wreathed in fire. Vulkan's visions returned, sharper now, as though something called to him. He began to see flashes of terror, of the Emperor seated upon his golden throne, immobile, yet radiant with power. He came to believe he had purpose still, a duty beyond the walls of Imperium Secundus. In the forged chambers of Hera, he began crafting again. He spoke little, save to those few who dared approach him, but his work became legend. Some said he was reforging his soul through the act of creation. Others whispered he was building something sacred. When Guilliman found him one evening surrounded by glowing metal and the smell of ozone, Vulkan looked up from his anvil. His eyes, though wary, held their old light. Vulkan told Guilliman why he was made, to stand where others fall, to endure where others die, to be the fire that guards against the dark. In that moment, Guilliman understood that though his brother's mind would never fully heal, his spirit had never been stronger. The Imperium Secundus would not last. The veil between its worlds would shatter, and the truth of the Emperor's living light would force them to abandon their dream. But the lesson it left behind endured, that faith is not blindness, and that hope can live even in exile. For Vulkan, it was not the walls of Macragge that mattered, it was the act of rebuilding them. Not the dream of perfection, but the will to rise after the fire. He had walked through hell, he had faced madness, betrayal, and death beyond counting. And now, at the heart of Ultramar, surrounded by brothers as scarred as he was, Vulkan remembered what the Forge had taught him long ago. No matter how many times it breaks, the hammer still strikes. The fire still burns, and the smith endures. The stars shifted, but the fire remained. When Vulkan emerged from the labyrinth trials of his rebirth, it was not vengeance that guided him, but duty. Reforged in pain and purpose, he returned to Nocturne for one final time. There, amid the volcanic breath of his homeworld, he shaped two final creations. A hammer heavier than memory and a strange device forged in fire and dream, one he did not fully understand. The hammer was a Draculae, his last and greatest weapon. The other was the Talisman of Seven Hammers, a relic wrought not from intent, but from something deeper, something guided by a force beyond his will. When it was done, Vulkan gathered three of his most loyal sons, survivors of the Darksword, and prepared to depart. Terror still cooled, and the Emperor's light pulsed like a distant furnace in the dark. The route home was barred by the ruin storm, but the Xenos had their own roads. With the talisman as key, Vulkan opened a way into the Eldar Webway. It was a corridor of impossible dimensions, a place between realities where logic twisted and predators waited. The Salamanders were not the first humans to walk those paths, but they were among the few to survive. Through fractured tunnels they advanced, shadowed by demonic echoes and hunted by creatures born of cruelty. At the heart of the Webway lay Commorragh, a city built not on stone, but on agony. The Dark Eldar struck without warning. Lightning fast and merciless, they attacked like a splintered wave, testing Vulkan's strength with every ambush. But the Primarch's flame did not falter. Blade and flame carved a path through the nightmare city until at last they passed beyond its broken edge, and the Webway shuddered open to the light of holy terror. They emerged deep within the palace vaults, surrounded by silence. The custodians were already waiting. Vulkan had not been summoned, he had been expected. Guided by hands unseen, he ascended to the Golden Throne, where the Emperor sat, unmoving yet all-seeing. Vulkan was not surprised. In that moment, he understood what the talisman truly was. It was never a weapon to be wielded in battle. It was a final measure, a silent blade kept at the Imperium's throat. Should Horus succeed and breach the sanctum of mankind, the talisman would trigger and turn terror to ash. It was a failsafe, a final silence that would deny chaos its prize. Vulkan, chosen not for his wrath but his restraint, had been the only one trusted to carry it. He accepted the burden and placed the talisman into the throne itself. There was no ceremony, the fire burned quietly. Then he descended to the Eternity Gate. The final threshold of the palace, the Eternity Gate stood not merely as an entrance but as the last hope of the Imperium. Here, Vulkan made a stand. No command was issued, no oath was sworn. He simply remained. As the Siege of Terror unfolded, the gate became a graveyard of fallen suns, shattered demons, and broken steel. Vulkan stood among the custodies, dying and rising again with every charge. He did not roar, did not shout, only endured. Again and again traitors cut him down. Again and again the fire restored him. He was a wall of living flame, one that could not be extinguished. But the war would not end in attrition. It demanded reckoning. Magnus returned. The Crimson King, warped by pride and the warp itself, sought to reach the throne of terror. He struck like a dagger, penetrating deep into the palace's heart through the Webway. The first confrontation came swiftly. Magnus appeared in the throne room, blade poised for the Emperor, and Vulkan stepped between them. The duel shattered stone and air alike, but Magnus retreated, wounded, vanishing into the depths. The final battle came not long after. Deep within the Imperial Webway, Magnus prepared his final assault, a ritual of ruin that would unmake the palace from within. Vulkan followed, alone. The confrontation was cataclysmic. Magnus unleashed every weapon at his disposal, blades forged of thought, flames of raw sorcery, the power of mind unbound. Vulkan was broken, reformed, broken again. The Webway itself trembled as the two Primarchs collided again and again, as if the gods themselves were dueling in a forgotten cathedral of light. Each death Vulkan endured pushed him closer to the brink, but the fire never went out, not even when Magnus unleashed his final spell, a curse of disintegration so complete that it tore Vulkan apart at the molecular level. There was nothing left but ash and light, and yet, in that moment, when nothing of him remained, the hammer moved. Erdrakule fell. Magnus's head was obliterated, his essence torn from the Webway and cast back into the Imperium. It was not victory born of strength, but of purpose. Vulkan did not kill out of rage, or pride, or vengeance. He struck because the fire demanded it. The fire would not die, not for pain, not for despair, not for gods. When silence returned to the impossible city, only the hammer stood in the dust. The siege roared on. Horus still waited in orbit, but one part of the war had ended. A traitor had fallen, a gate had held, and the fire had proven, once again, that it endures. Thus the Forge Father continued his journey, a long flame crossing the endless night, carrying the last light of humanity toward its dying sun. When the fires of the heresy cooled and the galaxy began to rebuild, Vulkan returned to his sons upon Nocturne. He found them scarred but dead fast. The salamanders had survived where so many others had broken. Together they reforged their chapter, tempering themselves as he had always taught, through duty, compassion, and the defence of the weak. For years he walked among them, teaching, rebuilding, and reminding them that strength was not cruelty but endurance. The world of Nocturne healed beneath his hand, its forges blazing once more, its people united in purpose. Then, without warning, he announced that his time among them was ending. The galaxy had entered a new age, an age that no longer required his constant presence. The Emperor's work must be carried on by the sons he had chosen. Vulkan left them with words that became oath and prophecy. He would return when mankind's need was greatest, when the end times came, and the fire of the Imperium guttered low. Until that hour, his sons were to guard the flame, to carry his teachings across the stars, and to remember that mercy is the truest strength. He departed alone into the void, bearing only his hammer and the light within his soul. None saw where he went. Some say he still walks the galaxy in secret, guiding from the shadows. Others believe he sleeps deep beneath Nocturne's mountains, his heart beating in rhythm with the planet's fire. But all salamanders know the truth. Their father's promise was not a metaphor. The Forge Father will return. The fire sleeps, but it has not died. Millennia passed in silence. The Imperium endured, but its flame had burned low. The Emperor was little more than a ghost bound to the throne. The Primarchs were gone, some vanished, some slain, some lost to madness. The galaxy had become a cold forge, its embers dimming beneath endless war. Then came the beast. The Orcs rose not as a horde but as a civilization, a vast, coordinated empire under a warlord of impossible size and intellect. World after world fell to its greenskin crusade, their weapons rivaling the Mechanicus' greatest engines. Whole systems were scoured clean in days. The Imperium teetered on the brink of extinction. The High Lords panicked. The Imperial fists had bled themselves dry defending what worlds they could. Armies burned, fleets shattered, and still the tide rose. Humanity looked to the stars for salvation, and once more, fire answered. He returned without herald or warning. On the forge world of Prometheus Reach, the air ignited as something vast and burning fell from the heavens. From the crater walked a figure blackened by ash, his eyes like molten glass. He bore no banner, no entourage, only a hammer whose head burned with inner light. The salamanders knew instantly, though 10,000 years had passed. The Forge Father had returned. Word spread like wildfire through the Imperium. Across a dying galaxy, the cry echoed, "Vulkan lives." He gathered his sons, reforging their scattered chapters into a single brotherhood. Under his command, the salamanders struck at the heart of the Orc Empire, not with desperation, but with precision. Vulkan fought as he always had, at the front, a giant among men, his hammer breaking through titanic plates of alien steel. Every blow rekindled faith that the Age of Heroes had not yet ended. The Orc Empire's core lay upon the world of Ullanor, reborn as a vast fortress city dominated by a walking god machine, the Temple Gargant. It was not a war engine in any human sense, but a blasphemous city built on legs, kilometres high, its hull carved with totems of the beast's cult. Volcanoes burned in its heart. Its weapons were suns chained to cannon mounts. From its back, the beast himself commanded the annihilation of worlds. Vulkan led the strike. The Imperial fleet bombarded the planet for days, but the Gargant endured. Its shields glowed like captured suns. None could breach it. Vulkan knew that only a direct assault would end it. He ordered his warriors to clear a path, and in the storm of fire that followed, he descended alone. Through the furnace winds he advanced, his armour scorched, his hammer burning brighter than the guns around him. The orcs came by the thousand. None slowed him. He tore through them like an inferno through dry earth, every motion a rhythm of forge and fury. He reached the Gargant's colossal legs, each larger than a hive spire, and began to climb. Melter blasts struck him, but the fire only hardened his resolve. He breached the outer hull, wading through molten corridors where green-skinned priests chanted to their machine god. Each fell beneath the hammer's swing, their shrines reduced to slag. Deep within, he reached the core, a sanctum lined with gold and bone, where the war boss known as the Beast waited. The creature was monstrous, larger than a dreadnought, its hide clad in plates of living iron. Around it flickered shields of raw psychic energy, powered by the wire of an entire empire. The two titans met amid the Gargant's furnace heart. Their clash was apocalyptic. Shockwaves tore through the war machine's structure. Gun decks collapsed. Reactor flames burst from the seams of its hull. The orcs watching from the plains below saw their god engine tremble as if struck by an earthquake. The beast was power incarnate, cunning, ancient, and impossibly strong. But Vulkan had been forged for this very moment. Every trial, every death, every flame had led to this single confrontation. He fought not for vengeance, but for the species that still believed in the light of the Emperor. The battle lasted minutes or centuries. Time had no meaning inside that roaring crucible. At its end, the hammer fell one final time, striking the beast down. The impact ignited the core, a detonation bright enough to sear the clouds from the sky. The Temple Gargant shuddered, split apart, and collapsed in its own reactor fire. The shockwaves flattened armies. The world beneath it burned. When the smoke cleared, there was no trace of the war boss, and no sign of the Forge Father. Only the hammer remained, half buried in cooling slag, still warm to the touch. The salamanders recovered it days later. They searched the ruins for weeks, finding only echoes. Footprints melted into the ground, fragments of armour fused into glass. Vulkan was gone once more, vanished as suddenly as he had come. Yet his axe saved the Imperium. The Orc Empire fractured, its unity broken with its leader's death. Humanity endured, its light rekindled by the return, and the loss, of one of the Emperor's truest sons. The legend spread faster than any transmission. Worlds that had not heard a loyalist signal in decades heard one phrase whispered in every forge, chapel and trench. Vulkan lives. He had returned in humanity's darkest hour and delivered it from extinction. And though he had vanished again into the void, his fire remained. In every salamander, in every craftsman who tempered mercy with strength, in every soldier who refused to abandon the helpless. The hammer endures, the fire never dies, and when the stars burn low once more, the galaxy knows whose hand will rekindle them. In the grim-dark future of the 41st millennium, where hope is a fragile thing and war is the only constant, the name of Vulkan still holds power. His flame, though distant, is never extinguished. It burns within the hearts of the salamanders, a guiding light in a galaxy steeped in shadow. Even as the Imperium fractures, Vulkan's legacy endures. After the defeat of the Beast and his disappearance on Ullanor, the Imperium struggled to make sense of what had occurred. Vulkan, the ever-living, had once more vanished into myth, and the galaxy seemed a little darker without him. The salamanders, despite their strength, had lost their guiding father, their Primarch. Yet, Their bond with Vulkan transcended mere leadership. It was a fire, a truth that existed in the very bones of the chapter. In the wake of the Cicatrix Maledictum, the galaxy had fractured. Warp storms ravaged the Imperium, cutting off vast sectors, while the forces of Chaos and Xenos pressed in from every side. For many, it seemed that the Imperium had reached its end. It was a time of darkness, where the light of the Emperor seemed distant and unreachable. The chapter's role as protectors of humanity was never more vital. And through it all, the Salamanders remembered the one unbreakable truth: Vulkan was eternal. During this tumultuous time, the Salamanders found themselves spread thin across countless worlds, defending against invasions, corruption, and heresy. The Great Rift, the breach in the Imperium's heart, tore through the galaxy, sending tremors that echoed even to Nocturne. The galaxy was broken, but the Salamanders stood as unyielding as the mountains of their home. And among them, the legend of their father burned brightly. Vulkan's relics, the sacred artifacts he had forged before his final disappearance, became more than just symbols of his return. They were anchors of faith, talismans that reminded the Salamanders of the unbreakable strength within them. As new generations of Space Marines took up the mantle, these relics were passed down, each one a reminder of the lessons Vulkan had left them: to endure, to protect, and to rebuild. The Spear of Vulkan, found on the ashes of Prometheus, became a weapon wielded by only the most worthy. When it was used in battle, it was as if the Primarch's flame returned, if only for a moment. The Gauntlet of the Forge, discovered deep within the Eye of Terror, became a symbol of unyielding craft and devotion to the Imperium. And the Unbound Flame, that blessed weapon, pure and eternal, was wielded in the darkest moments when hope seemed lost. Each time one of these relics was brandished, it was said that Vulkan was there, in spirit if not in body. The Tome of Fire, the sacred scripture that chronicled Vulkan's tenets, was carried by the chapter's librarians, who sought to understand and apply the Primarch's teachings in every battle. It was said that the book itself was not merely written by Vulkan, but imbued with his will, a guide to creating strength not through destruction, but through salvation. Its pages could heal as well as harm, offering wisdom in the darkest of times. Yet even as his name lived on, so too did the whispers. Many believed that Vulkan had never truly disappeared. Some claimed to have seen him wandering the warp-torn sectors of the galaxy, his form as indomitable as ever. Others believed that Vulkan had become something more, a figure of legend who would return when the Imperium stood at its greatest need. Perhaps he was waiting for the galaxy to burn to a point where his flame could reignite it. The Sisters of Battle spoke of a vision, during a fierce battle on the world of Hephaestus, where a figure cloaked in flame appeared in their midst. It was said that the figure carried the hammer of Vulkan, though its form seemed ever-changing, shifting like the very essence of fire itself. Some of the sisters fell to their knees, believing they had seen the Primarch himself, return to lead the Imperium once more. The Adeptus Mechanicus, ever driven by mystery and myth, recorded strange energy readings emanating from the volcanic planet of Nocturne. Readings that suggested the Primarch's body, though lost, was somehow still active, still waiting. It became a pilgrimage for the faithful to visit his tomb, to leave offerings of faith, knowing that their Primarch would never truly be gone. But despite the rumours and legends, the truth was far more elusive. Vulkan's true fate remained locked within the warp, lost to time, or perhaps hidden by the will of the Emperor. Yet his legacy had already shaped the galaxy. In the aftermath of the Great Rift, the Salamanders themselves had become the last bastion of hope. They were the protectors of humanity, the guardians who would never give in. Across every battlefield, Vulkan's lessons endured. Each Salamander carried the teachings of his father, to protect the weak, to fight for justice, to never turn from the flames that threatened to engulf the Imperium. Their flame, like the fire of Nocturne, would never die. The Salamanders now held vigil, not just over the last embers of their Primarch's fire, but over the last hope of the Imperium. They faced every challenge with the knowledge that no matter the horrors of the galaxy, they would endure. For in the dark places of the galaxy, Vulkan's name still held sway. The fire still burned. Somewhere, far beyond the reaches of mortal understanding, Vulkan watched and waited. His return, when it came, would be the fire that would burn away the darkness. Until that day, the Salamanders would continue their eternal vigil. They would fight, protect, and endure, knowing that the flame of their father would never die, and that, one day, the hammer would strike again. The hammer falls silent, but the fire still burns. Vulkan's story does not end. His sons carry his will across the stars, each salamander a spark of the father's flame. And though 10,000 years have passed, his promise endures. The fire does not die, it only sleeps. If you walk the dark, walk with fire, and strike the seal of subscription to return for the next transmission. This is Dominissimo Voxlore, transmitting from hidden forges across the broken channels of the Imperium.